What's up? What's up? Welcome to another episode of the Digital and Social Media Sports Podcast. I am your host, Neil Horowitz. You can find me on Twitter, NJH287. Hit me up on LinkedIn as well, where I post more content and would love to engage with you. The website, as always, dsm.net. Find more content and episodes. And of course, you can find every episode and subscribe on your preferred podcast platform. What a fantastic show for you guys today. I enjoyed this conversation so much. We hit on so many great topics. I am in a soccer mood as I speak to you. The MLS Cup just recently ended not too long ago, a few days ago, with LAFC coming out on top in an exciting game. The World Cup, with the Men's World Cup, is right around the corner, and I have another soccer guest on for you today. My guest is Kyle Sheldon. He is the founder and CEO of Name and Number, a very recently started soccer marketing agency and creative agency, just leveraging Kyle and his expertise and his network and peers as well. But Kyle is just so good to talk to. He really is very articulate and thoughtful with how he speaks to the marketing of soccer in the U.S. It describes the interesting marketplace that we see ourselves in, and what the interesting fan, the U.S. soccer fan, MLS, Major League Soccer, and what they can and are doing to market themselves. I cannot speak highly enough of this conversation. You really got to stick around for it. Before we get to my conversation with Kyle, just a quick word to open on the recent layoffs. As I speak to you right now, we are not far removed from the massive layoffs of Twitter, with several folks in the the greater sports space in that area affected. Unfortunately, there's a lot of good people there. Also, Dapper Labs, a lot of folks in that business lost their jobs as well due to layoffs. And then Meta is announcing their layoffs are coming soon. They have some coming soon on their side as well. Just a tough time to see a lot of our colleagues, friends, peers, acquaintances, mentors, people you look up to, lose their job as a result of layoffs. And I've been there. And I think going through my most recent job before I landed at Greenfly, and was at a company called Hopscotch, which was a startup that was flying high for a little bit, and then it eventually closed its doors. It was most startups don't make it, and while we lasted a long time, we didn't make it. So I found myself on the other end of losing your job through no fault of your own, of not getting fired or whatever because of poor performance. And it's tough, but I will tell you yes, it was amazing to hear from people when you sort of put the word out there that you lost your job and you're sort of a free agent and want to get back out there to get all the text messages, DMs, calls, the conversation side afterwards. So meaningful. So if you know someone, definitely reach out. But I will say that's obvious, of course. But I think the most important part is to not just make it a one-time thing, especially if you're close with this person. Hit them up, text them every week if you haven't heard from them, or see how their job search is going, see if they found any contract gigs, keep an eye out open for them for opportunities, see if they're learning something new, maybe learn something new along with them, take an online course with them, but just really make sure that they know you're in their corner throughout, and not just at that moment when everyone kind of offers their sympathies, as I have as well. And so that's just a quick word on that, having gone through it myself. I know there's a lot of brilliant, sharp people that are now looking for their next chapter, their next job, and they're going to kick ass somewhere. Just brilliant people at all these companies that unfortunately are making massive cuts with layoffs. So not to start this show on a downer note, but hopefully it's an inspirational note that you reach out to someone if you know someone right now, and you really inspire each other, because we're all going to go through our ups and downs. And to be able to be there for each other through both of those, all the ups and downs, and together. All right, but listen up, because you're going to enjoy this conversation so much. Have your notebook ready. It's really going to get you thinking and talking. Listen up to my chat with Kyle Sheldon of Name and Number. Back with today's guest, and I am so psyched for today's guest. We could have just been recording this whole time offline. This is how great our conversation is already. I'm joined on the podcast today by Kyle Sheldon. He is the founder and CEO of Name and Number. It's a soccer-specific marketing creative agency that's really targeting connecting brands to American soccer culture. And Kyle, so psyched to talk to you. Welcome to the podcast today.
Neil, thanks for having me, man. I'm excited for the conversation.
There's so much to be learned here. Soccer is quickly growing, and we are, of course, talking, not to date our podcast, we're talking within weeks of the World Cup going off. And, of course, we're all anticipating the World Cup coming to North America. And MLS it's just put out their numbers. They're on a huge growth trajectory, continuing to grow as well. And USL, women's soccer, NWSL, so much good stuff going on. And I'm excited to pick your brain about really what's going on in the greater marketing space, how brands can get involved, and how we can help get the beautiful game out to more people in the States. But before we get to the meat of our discussion, Kyle, I want to hear about you. Tell us about you. Have a really impressive background, a great career path, and tell us about everything you've done up to this point, and any tips for folks that want to do what you do.
Yeah, thanks, Neil. I'll start by just saying I'm a lifelong soccer fan and player. I played my whole childhood. Three siblings who all played. We all played in college at different levels. I think I can best describe my collegiate career as mediocre, very, very mediocre. I was a D3 bench warmer my senior year of college, so that gives you a sense of my on-field prowess. But I've always loved this sport, and I was in high school when MLS started, and kind of in my high school college days realized that this is something I might be able to make a career out of. I didn't know exactly what I wanted to do going into college. I was a comms and media studies major, and went to grad school to get my master's in PR, and that was kind of my path. And I left Marquette University my second semester of my last year with just a couple months to go to take what I called my initial dream job at DC United. Entry level communications coordinator, making no money, writing press releases, doing game notes, and setting up interviews for the players in the locker room. And it was a really great time to join that club. That was 2005, and they had just won MLS Cup. It was the height of Freddie Adu mania. They had some really cool legendary players, Jaime Moreno and Ben Olsen. And so I felt really fortunate to be there. Spent 8 years in DC, and was really, again, just fortunate to grow my career there. The nature of the league at that point, it's a bit of a startup mentality. It was only 10 years old. And so you ended up just wearing a lot of hats. So I was able to take on a lot over the course of my 8 years there, eventually overseeing content and graphic design, all sort of areas of marketing in addition to comms. So it was a really great experience. And, you have limited resources, but you try to make it work, and creativity kind of wins the day in those scenarios. And then I spent some time at NASCAR. I oversaw social media there for 3 years. It was a really intentional step away from the sport. I knew I would come back to it because it's my love and passion. But I wanted to test myself in a space that I was really unfamiliar with. Probably not advice I would give to every person who interviews for a job, but I told them, if you want to hire someone who understands NASCAR, do not hire me, because I've never watched a race the whole way through. But I had a great experience there. Learned a ton. Social was really growing at that point in a meaningful way. But then the Seattle Sounders called and offered me a job to oversee their marketing, and I jumped at that chance. So spent a couple of years there, made the move to the Fire, and spent 3 years overseeing marketing and content and brand there, and have been consulting this year and starting to put the wheels on what will be the agency that you mentioned, Name and Number, launching very soon. I think when folks listen to this, it will have just launched probably in the prior week. As we record, we're about a week out from that launch. So that's about as quick as I can do it, Neil.
Oh, it's so exciting. I'm excited to really pick your brain on all these different elements and so many different directions we can go here. But I kind of want to talk, especially you were part of MLS as it was very much a growing league. It still is a growing league, and all of a sudden this thing called social media came along, and it sort of levels the playing field to some degree. I mean, yes, like back 20 years ago when we were just coming up, like you couldn't get on ESPN necessarily. It was harder. You had to get work for newspaper coverage and local news coverage. And then social media came along, and it's like, hey, we can tell our own story, and we can really cut through the clutter, so to speak, if we produce content and tell stories, let alone our own websites and later apps. So like, what was that like at the ground level especially with DC United early on, and then as you grew in your career to be like, hey, like we can be as big as we want because we have our own platforms now.
Yeah, it's been really fun to watch the transformation and evolution over the years. My first ever internship was with the Minnesota Thunder of the then USL A League back in 2004. And I was a communications intern, and we were faxing box scores at that time still, right? It's not even 20 years ago, which is pretty wild. We were faxing box scores to the local papers. And, in my time at DC United, when I started there, it was very much entry level, pounding the pavement, making phone calls to TV outlets and newspapers, and trying to garner coverage, because it was the only way you could kind of get your message out beyond your website. And again, it was sort of just a happy accident that I happened to be there as Facebook was just starting to come online. Really, Twitter was kind of the accelerator, I think, for connecting to fans directly. And we were in a place where we were just able to test and learn and try to figure out what was or wasn't going to work. And it was evident to those of us at the club pretty early on that Twitter was going to be a bit of a game changer for connecting to fans directly, to your point. So we were on early, and again, testing and learning. Marketing was frankly a lot easier prior to that. It was kind of paid media and earned media and not much else. And now, it's there's so many choices. There's so many ways to connect. There's so many ways to communicate your brand and your message. But that's also what makes it really fun, is that there's no kind of right size or one size fits all plan. You have to really be thoughtful about how and where you're connecting to folks. And again, I just feel fortunate I was able to, at DC, kind of take a lot of that on just naturally as the club evolved and as we found ways to try to connect to fans. But it's a much different place, that's for sure.
Yeah, and what was the content, I guess, strategy and production like? Like, I think I look back, even nowadays, some of the best content goes on as part of the game presentation, as part of the video board content. Sometimes it's working in tandem with an RSN, and you're doing something really cool there. Like when you guys had these own platforms, when you had even the website, did it all of a sudden mean, okay, we need to put more muscle into our content because now we have all these platforms to serve, we have all this opportunity to really to realize and to draw fruit from. So like, and especially coming from a side where you were both with marketing and communications a little bit, how did the importance of content really come to the forefront? And what was the perspective like? Like, hey, like we want to have a great game presentation, or we want to drive fans with content. What was that whole perspective like?
I think in those early days, Neil, I'm not sure we knew exactly what it was going to be. It was just evident that you could connect and tell your story directly. And I'm guessing if I were to pull up old DC United tweets, it'd probably be pretty cringy at this point, right? I'm sure it was, I mean, look, you couldn't post photos when Twitter started, right? It was just sort of text only. So it was really very specific kind of one-to-one communication. We were fortunate to have we didn't have a lot of resources, but we were given resources to go test and learn. And that's a credit to Kevin Payne, the former president and CEO there, who really was trying to help us figure out how to kind of, just move things forward a little bit at that time. And we hired a video producer. I think we were the first MLS club to hire a video producer. We hired a writer, one of the first clubs in the league to do that. And it was really starting to understand the ability to kind of tell your own story directly. I actually think that there has been a bit of an overcorrection in some ways, in that I think clubs across sports, not just soccer, they tend to almost overemphasize their own channels. And it's not to say you shouldn't. Clearly, you should invest and put a ton of time and energy into the content you're producing. It's a great sponsorship mechanism. But people have sort of lost the art a little bit of driving earned media and the sort of amplification impact that can have. And so I do think teams have to be on guard against that, which is to say there's still a lot of value in placing a story in the right spot, in the right outlet at the right time. And so, it's a really, again, it's this balance of internal, external, what you produce in-house versus when you bring on a partner to do it. And again, there's no one size fits all, but it's fun to explore. It's what I really enjoy.
Yeah, I was listening to an ESPN panel a couple days ago, or yesterday even, when they were talking with their social and content team, and they talked about how they really want to. I love the way they put this, open source content, kind of, and it's not so much like UGC, but more of like, I think the way they put it was, how can we get a piece of IP that we have or we produce, and then open source that, allow others to help then tell the story on our behalf or with us, or put their own spin on it and reach their audience. And that helps with more, diverse perspectives, and it helps with more inclusion. And it feels more genuine or more powerful when it comes from someone that is someone else, because they know their audience. And it's almost like, yes, we want to tell our own story and produce our own content and reach our own fans, of course, on our own platforms. But when someone else is taking your content and sharing it with their followers, like, it has that much more meaning, and it helps to reach that much more of a broader audience. And it's kind of cool to think about in that sense. And we're seeing it now play out with, the creator economy and micro influencers. And would you rather someone consume your content on a platform that you own versus a platform that someone else owns, but it might feel more authentic or more powerful coming from them? And there's no right or wrong answer there, but it was really interesting perspective to hear from ESPN.
Yeah, I think the probably most people answer, you want both, right? You want to have great content on your own channels. You want to have other people covering you. You want influencers talking about you. And I also think you're just in a space and time where you don't have a choice, right? Whatever you put out into the world, people are going to take it and they're going to put their spin on it. They're going to add their own images. They're going to add their own text. I mean, we're in such a sort of a meme culture where if you put out something that resonates or connects or that is a little bit wonky, then people are just going to do whatever they want with it. And that can be very, very good. And sometimes it can be challenging. but that's just the that's the world we live in, man. Everybody's got a voice and an opportunity in some platform, big or small, however it is. And you've got to kind of find the right way to navigate through that.
Yeah, and I think it's a good segue. I want to kind of hear about how, because I think a lot of us that came up through the social media space have, some people, and not everyone, has circled the, the VP of marketing role or the CMO role or marketing leadership role that you have been able to take on in your career. So when you made that jump from NASCAR, primarily digital and social, to a VP of marketing role with the Seattle Sounders, that's like, was that intimidating? Did, like, what you have to learn differently, and how that affect your thinking of, hey, we went from the scoreboard is engagement and follower growth and things like that, to now there really are a more bottom line objectives potentially, and just a more holistic way I have to look at things.
Yeah, it certainly, the jump from NASCAR to Sounders was unique. I was, again, fortunate in DC to have a role where, while I wasn't a VP of marketing, I was able to oversee a lot of the external facing departments, and so I was able to really sort of fail fast and learn in DC. And then I think, going to my perspective generally on social media professionals is that if they aren't already, they're the future CMO, because it's a space where you really truly are connected, especially working for a team or a club, right? You're connected to every area of the business. You're the primary touch point for fans, for customers, and you have to have a little understanding of everything, right? You have to have a little understanding of ticket offers and corporate partnerships and brand and communication. Is you have to kind of understand and be able to touch all of it and translate it both for your audience and then for your channel. And the audience on each channel obviously could be very different. So I found the move to NASCAR for me, and being solely focused on social for those 3 years, was incredibly valuable, because I got connection to every area of the business, and the experience of being able to be in the room with Fortune 500, Fortune 100 companies, trying to help, at that time, this was sort of, I was there, 13, 14, 15. You're helping to translate for what just are largely older, sort of disconnected CMOs, CFOs, CROs, trying to help them understand the power of social and how to bring it to life. And it's not just it's not as simple as you might think. It's not just, could you tweet this for us, which
Right.
happens a lot and still happens. That experience was invaluable. But the transition to the Sounders for me, and kind of moving into a VP of marketing role, I went from I had 7-8 people under me at DC. I had 3 direct reports at NASCAR, but all of a sudden I had 6 or 7 departments and more than 20 people on a team. And so there was a really big adjustment there for me. It was going from kind of doing it all, wearing every hat. You were doing strategy, concept, planning, tactics, and the execution in both my prior roles, to now you've got a bigger team and you have to rely on other people to do the work. And the reality of having to be a leader and a manager is it doesn't really it happens sort of as you go. There's not a lot of training that happens for managers and for leaders, right? And some people just have it. And I don't think I'm a bad manager, but I had to learn a lot of lessons in terms of delegation, in terms of setting people up for success, being prepared that someone might hear, hey, this is the problem we're trying to solve, and this is the answer I think we should go forth with, and me saying that's not what I would do. And I would say, one of the things that I learned, and it took me about a year at the Sounders, is that really great work becomes more possible when you're able to unleash the talent and creativity of others. My job as a leader, clearly I'm bringing particular experience and thoughts and ideas to the table, creativity, et cetera. But my job really is to ensure that the people on the team and surrounding kind of everyone that's there is to make sure they apply their talent, their creativity, their thinking in the right way. How do I put up the guardrails so that they're aimed at the right objectives, and then be a little bit comfortable with they might do it differently than you did, and that's okay. And often, by the way, if you hire really well, you're going to have people do it better than you would have done anyway, and you start to understand that there really is sort of strength in numbers. So that transition with me to the Sounders, it took me a good year to kind of figure that out and find my space and be able to back away from some of the day-to-day work and try to provide a little more flexibility for the team to kind of go and do what they did best.
Yeah, I love that perspective. And throughout your career, you've done, continue to do great work and really developing strong brands. And I've been lucky enough to go to a Sounders game. I was there and saw them play against Portland, so it was a hell of a game. And I always, especially in soccer, you think about, like, are we producing soccer fans? Are we producing Sounders fans? Are we producing Fire fans? And so when you come into, whether it's Sounders or the Fire or DC United, like, is it more about, hey, we, especially I mean, hell, a city like Seattle that really has been scorned, of course, with their
Mm.
pro sports teams in the past leaving? Do you really hone in on that identity of, hey, you're from Seattle, this is your soccer team, this is a chance to go out and have that passion for your place? Or is it like just as important to say, hey, like soccer is a great sport, you probably played it as a kid, and this is the chance to see it at the highest level in the States? So like, what was that balance like for you? I both, not just at Seattle, but I mean,
Yeah.
certainly from a macro perspective, with your soccer career.
Yeah, I mean, I think the starting point as you think about sort of developing fandom is that, and this has changed a lot in the almost 20 years I've been working in the sport, but the starting point is that soccer in this country, I don't think it's a stretch to say by far it's the most congested sport in the world in this country, right? The competition for time and eyeballs as it relates to soccer in the United States is incredible. I mean, you can literally watch almost any league around the world at any given time, right? And so I think that's probably the biggest shift that's happened over the last 10 to 15 years as you think about kind of MLS and the domestic leagues is the availability to watch anything. You're competitive, you're competing with eyeballs and time from every league, right? You can watch MLS, Liga MX, Premier League, Bundesliga, Serie A, Ligue 1, La Liga, Eredivisie, to say nothing of Europa League, FA Cup, Copa Sudamericana, Libertadores, U.S. Open Cup, and that's not even talking about national teams, World Cup qualifying, the Euros, Gold Cup, Nations League. I mean, you could just go, the list goes on and on, which is a problem for my marriage because I watch a lot of soccer because I really love it. Luckily, my two boys who are 5 and 3 also seem to really enjoy it. But just to come back to your question, I mean, I think I'm always a believer in kind of a high tide raises all boats. As soccer fandom generally increases in this country, which it continues to do, is that you're more likely, if you're an MLS club, to connect to those folks. But the nuance that exists within soccer in the States really truly is unlike anywhere in the world. And as I start name and number the new agency, this is kind of the entire point. Really, is that the understanding needed and necessary to navigate the really complicated, convoluted soccer fan base in this country, it's just very difficult. And there's a starting point of knowledge necessary to be able to do that. You could be at an MLS game sitting next to a Manchester United fan who actually doesn't really care for the MLS product, but came with his buddies. Someone who's a diehard, let's call, say Atlanta United fan, but also supports FC Barcelona, but for whatever reason has a connection to River Plate. And, I've seen data over my career that soccer fans in the U.S. are more likely to have multiple teams that they follow than just about anywhere else in the world, which makes sense when you think about it, right?
Yeah.
It's a dynamic country with people from all different backgrounds, and you've got really kind of first generation soccer fans in a lot of cases who are discovering the sport, and so their attachment to a particular team varies pretty wildly, right? It could be that they played FIFA and for some reason they picked this team to play with FIFA. It could be that there was a particular player that they really loved. It could be because the team's in their backyard. It could be the values that a team kind of speaks out into the world. So it's a long-winded answer, Neil, but I think this is really the crux of what's interesting about the sport at this moment in time. And as we look towards 2026 and the interest that will come in the coming years is, how do you navigate through that really kind of complicated, convoluted soccer fan base? Because if you don't speak the language, and I mean that literally and figuratively, if you don't speak the language, it is really easy to have a misstep and to actually do some damage to your credibility, right? I'm thinking in particular of sponsors, right? Is if you don't sort of do it the right way. I saw a soccer commercial a couple of days ago where they referenced Neymar scoring the most points. It's like, that's not what you say in soccer, right? That's just not, it's not the language that you use. So, I've probably lost a little track of your question at this point, but for MLS clubs, there's no right or wrong answer, and I can certainly go a little deeper on how I think you sort of approach it as an MLS market.
Oh yeah, like we'll dive deep here. This is what it's all about. And I mean, I look overseas. I talk to people that have grown up in. I mean, hell, I have coworkers from South America, and we talk about how like someone is a Corinthians fan. They're born and raised, and like you can't tell them otherwise. And it's very much a part of your identity. And to your point, like for MLS, there was no hereditary identity for most of us. Our grandparents didn't grow up necessarily with a football team that wasn't as accessible to them, and so we can't really look to the Premier Leagues or the Bundesligas to say, hey, let's follow that fan paradigm, because it's a different mindset. And so like, when you look at what we're trying to do in the States, are we trying to, is the goal to get to that point where you are born into being a Sounders fan, or is the goal just to really just produce soccer fans and people will latch on to just being part of something? Like what does the ceiling look like for us? Like, should we aspire to be like the soccer crazed nations throughout the rest of the world?
Yeah, I think there's different perspectives, right? If you work for an MLS club, you're focused on creating fans of your team and of your club. I'm someone who's always just loved the sport, and so for me, I'm a big believer in soccer as a connector, as a community builder, and so I love seeing the sport grow on the whole. And I think you've seen, in MLS over the years, you've seen a lot of different things that have been tried. And again, when I came into the league, a lot of what the teams were doing were targeting families. The old soccer mom, kind of air quotes soccer mom phrase that was thrown around a lot then. You saw teams building their facilities, their stadiums out kind of in the suburbs with tons of fields around them. And that's really evolved. It's really evolved as you've seen other teams come into MLS. And I think most importantly, Toronto FC in 2007, Seattle Sounders in 2009, you started to see a different type of person attend those games. And there was a different connection in the city, in the community, that just indicated a different opportunity. And I think those were really eye-opening, sort of eye-opening moments for people around the league. And a lot of teams are still, frankly, trying to capture it. But the shift to starting to target the young professional, the 18 to 34, the person who is maybe equally interested in the experience as they were the on-field product. And then as you sort of fast forward and you look at, I think it's a more subtle shift, but you see Atlanta and Minnesota and LAFC and more recently Austin have come into the league. And these teams are very culture focused, they're value focused, they're community focused. Rich Roscoe, who's a friend of mine, who's the chief brand officer at LAFC, he's been there from the start. And he said something to me kind of as they were getting up and running and they were having some success. He said, plug into culture before you plug into soccer. And I think that's just sort of a good recipe for anyone to do, right? Is you're a team and a club that's representative of a very specific place. And that very specific place has cultural connection points. It has its own creative community. It has music and design and, just a lifestyle that's really specific to that space. So my team in Seattle got sick of me saying this, but one of the things I always call back to is how do we do something that's uniquely Seattle, right? There's 3 teams up at the Pacific Northwest. How do we do something that's unique to us? And so that evolution of how teams have attempted to market themselves and what teams are still trying to do, it continues. And it's a fascinating time to be in the sport.
Yeah, I love the commentary on culture there. I remember, learning about when LAFC was launching and Colin Kelly was really helping to spearhead a lot of this growth within the community and finding who those supporters groups are going to be and latching on with them and helping just co-evolve the brand along with your fans. And it was really, really cool to hear about that. And I think looking like I've been to some MLS games, of course, over the years, and I try to think of what kind of atmosphere it kind of relates to. And the closest thing we probably have is like college football almost, or college basketball, where you have this raucous atmosphere. You know what you're going to get into. You know that people are going to be on their feet most of the game and screaming, and you have this fan avidity, which is, like, frankly, you don't see that as much in the major pro sports oftentimes, unless it's like postseason. And so, like, are we best off trying to really increase those avid fans, those heavy supporters groups, the ones that are going to be chanting throughout the entire 90 minutes plus of a match, and at maybe the expense of the more casuals who are just, maybe who are the more families who are just looking for an affordable family outing, to use the minor league parlance a little bit. Like, do we want to get to that point where it really does become this experience where it's just, cathartic almost, like we see overseas in some of the European leagues? And so as you think about marketing a soccer club and soccer culture in general in the States, are we trying to grow those supporters groups and really push that atmosphere, this unique atmosphere of being so passionate about things, versus just, more of a laid back experience, and you're just there to sort of enjoy it and represent your city, I guess?
Yeah, it's I think it's a question that MLS has been sort of, I don't want to say wrestling with necessarily, but thinking a lot about over the last decade or so. And the reality is, and this comes from someone who loves MLS. I call myself an MLS snob. I mean, I really love the league, but the reality is it's not the best in the world. And Americans are used to watching the best athletes in the world in their country, in their backyard. If you look at any of the competitive sports domestically, NBA, NFL, MLB, NHL, WNBA, et cetera, I mean, they're the best in the world, and the best players play in Europe. They play in a couple of different leagues. It's one of the things that makes the sport fascinating. There isn't one league or one country that owns all the best players. They play across the world. So, MLS has never really had the ability to say, come watch the best soccer players in the world. And so to your, sort of to your points there, the experience and the supporters experience in particular is the differentiator for sports viewing or attendance in this country. To your point, it just doesn't exist. College football probably is the closest, but if you go to an Austin or an LAFC game, Portland or Seattle, and there's a lot of teams now across the league who have this experience, right? You see what happens in Cincinnati and Charlotte. It's grown a lot over the last few years. But there's nothing like it. There's nothing like the 90 minutes of singing, chanting, drum beating, just raucous atmosphere. For my money, LAFC does have the best experience in the league. And I've not been to every stadium, but I've been to a bunch. And they just go at it, man. And it's incredible to watch. And if you sort of are an observer of human behavior, and you go to these games and you're watching someone and you just sort of, have a sense, maybe they're a more casual fan, their eyes are on the supporters as much as they're on the field. And that's both good and bad, right? There's pros and cons to that. But I think that, to your question about where do you focus your efforts? I mean, I think it has to start with growing supporters culture, because that's the differentiator. And naturally, if you create something that is experiential, that is raucous, that is interesting to watch, that is enjoyable to participate in, then other people will come, I think, because of that experience. And, so much of marketing today, this is true in sports, but I think it's true kind of across everywhere. It's about community building, and it's about creating a sense of belonging. And it's about really, truly bringing people together. Both, it doesn't always have to be physical, but the coming together of people in a stadium and watching and having a shared experience to something on the field. There really isn't, for me, anything like it. I'm not a gamer, so I can't speak to maybe what that experience is like the way some others could, but I think ultimately that's what you're selling in marketing. And it's less so, the old, buy 4 tickets, get 2 off, 2 for free. That stuff doesn't work. That's just the consumer is too savvy and has too many other things taking up their time and attention to really fall for sort of, really standard marketing tactics.
No, it's interesting because I think like the American way has kind of been like it's an entertainment product, and you come for entertainment, and there's been some of that when I talk to folks that work for soccer clubs overseas, it's like it's almost for lack of a better term, foreign to them, where it like and different from the way that we grew up watching sports in the States, where you have your fan cams and your dance cams and your various gimmicks throughout the event, and just that's not how soccer works. It's continuous flow. You're playing the game the entire time, so you're not there for the sausage race necessarily. It's a different mindset, and yet there is some of that happening, or like starting to trickle a little bit overseas, maybe in the pregame elements and the fan stuff. But it's also just like how a lot of these corporations make money to it, so we can activate more sponsors that way. And so is there a little bit of do you have to find that balance of, hey, like families or fans have come to expect that they're going to see all these gimmicks, but ultimately the best atmosphere is accomplished when you don't have those gimmicks, when it really is that sense of belonging. If you go to a concert, or not necessarily concerts long term, if you go to a Broadway show or something, you don't necessarily feel a community with the rest of the audience. You're just watching the show. Whereas at the best sports events, at these soccer events, you really do feel like you're part of something when it's at its best. And that's, to your point, that's what really seeps through and creates that fan versus just, oh, I'm just doing something fun on a Friday night. And so I don't really know where I'm going with this, but yeah, I'll let you just.
Yeah, I understand what you're getting at. And I think, this is the obvious answer, but there really isn't a right or wrong answer. And the experience of going to a minor league baseball game that might have, 20 or 30 kind of gimmicks that happen during the course of the game can also be really entertaining. And you look at what the Savannah Bananas have created down in Georgia, and it's just full on entertainment, right? To the point where they've changed the rules of the game for entertainment's sake. And it's a really interesting little case study. I don't know what its staying power is, but it'll be interesting to see over the next 5 to 10 years if they can kind of maintain the level and the height of entertainment that they're operating at down there. And I think, I just think in soccer, the game is just built in such a way that it becomes difficult to do those things, right? Just the structure of 45-minute halves, continuous play. You really have, as I've overseen game presentation over my career, and, you've got about 10 minutes before the game starts when you've got an engaged fans in their seats preparing to watch the game. You've got 15 minutes or so at halftime, but just about everybody goes to grab food or drink. And so it's sort of limited the impact you can have. And then you got about 3 minutes after the game ends before people are, on the concourse going to their cars. So, I think there's room, and it's kind of the great thing about America as the melting pot for soccer is you've got all this collision of cultures and backgrounds and experiences that kind of come from all over the world, where I think it's the right place to do some kind of things where you can test and learn and see what works and see what resonates. And I think, again, you've seen across different MLS markets, teams have tried different things. Some of them might seem gimmicky. I was talking to somebody the other day about, Atlanta's the big hammer with the spike that they put in. It couldn't be kind of more gimmicky, right? The guy hits the thing with the hammer, and then spike about a second later goes down a little bit, right? You look at what Charlotte's done with their crown and their sort of king's throne.
Yeah.
Um, a lot of people would call those things gimmicky, but what matters and what's important is, does it communicate your brand in some way, and do your fans and supporters connect to it? Do they believe that it's something that sort of speaks to them, speaks to their market, speaks to the community that's been built there? So I don't think it's a right or wrong answer. I'm a traditionalist myself in many ways. I love the tradition of the sport. I tend to like kind of a cleaner match day experience than some others might. But I've evolved my thinking there too, which is it's entertainment. It's supposed to be fun. So if you can find something that someone might call a little bit gimmicky, but if your fans and supporters like it, and if it enhances their experience at the stadium, then by all means, man, go for it.
Yeah. And I want to take that perspective, that conversation a little bit into the content side, the social side as well, of seeing. I feel like I see a lot of really powerful stuff coming from MLS teams that really does showcase what they're about, the community they're from, the city they're from, and that local civic pride. And yes, you get some of the playful stuff of what's going on at training and whatnot as well. But I don't see as much. If you look like the NBA as an example, like there's a lot more of the highlight driven hype videos, or it's look at this dunk or this great great pass, and like I guess what's your perspective on developing that fan base through social, and what is going to resonate with them the most, and how do you chase those short-term goals versus long-term goals of, hey, we're trying to really push a brand here and get that civic pride, get that team pride, versus, hey, check out this crazy trick play from training the other day.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think it's clearly it's imperative, right? Social is now so embedded into everyone's, I don't say everyone's, but most people's kind of daily lives, right? It's pretty unusual someone doesn't scroll through Instagram or Twitter or TikTok in a given day. And so it's really important, I think, that you have a really clear strategy in that space, of course, and recognizing that each channel is a little bit different, and what works on one channel may not work on the other. I think you're right. I think soccer teams, MLS teams, domestic teams in particular, probably spend more time and energy on content kind of outside the line, so to speak. In my experience, an incredible goal in MLS is always going to be one of your most viewed videos, right? As opposed to the personality driven kind of, player fun video. But you really do have to do both. And it's been interesting to see how content consumption has evolved. I mean, it's obvious at this point, right? But people's attention spans are shorter. They're flipping their thumb really fast past content that doesn't grab in the first second or two.
Yeah.
So it's a difficult space to be. And I think, my sort of philosophy has always been, you're sort of, everything's marketing at some point, right? Everything's kind of brand. You're always communicating something about your club or your players, or kind of who you say you are. And just how it's applied can vary. And so, you attempt to create whatever the intent, you're attempting to create something that ultimately entertains, and something that will grab attention, and something that someone will be willing to watch. And you have to be realistic that, a sort of deeper personal profile on a player who is a spot starter is really just for your avid fans. It's pretty unlikely that's going to break through to a more casual fan. And I believe in sort of ultimately kind of segmenting your fan base in different ways so that you're creating content for each. The entry point to fandom, or I should say the number of entry points to fandom, is vast. There's a lot of ways people get connected to a club, to an experience. And so you can't do it all, especially in a league where there still are limited resources. But to be thoughtful about that, and ultimately to ensure you have the right guiding principles as to who you say you are and what your brand is and what you stand for, is really what's most important.
Yeah, and you really can stand out with your content too. You mentioned the Bananas earlier, and I was lucky enough to have a guest from the Savannah Bananas on the podcast recently, and they do an amazing job on TikTok and have reached millions of fans on there from around the world who just enjoy watching their baseball content, and will probably never make their way down to Savannah, Georgia, or maybe the Banner Ball World Tour will get there eventually, other places. But you think about first of all, the global recognition of soccer as a sport. And now all of a sudden, if you are the Seattle Senators, the Chicago Fire, Atlanta United, whatever, and you create some sick content, you might have fans all over the world seeing that content, and all of a sudden maybe they can become an Atlanta United fan. And what does that mean? And you already have the European clubs certainly who are trying to develop these global fan bases as well. And so it's almost like you can grow that footprint by playing in that level playing field that is social media, and really creating that content that does cut through. But is it more important to to have that global appeal versus, reaching the fans that are ultimately can actually come to your games and buy tickets. Like, so you have to balance those things of, hey, we are an MLS team. We don't necessarily have the billions of dollars that an NFL team does. We need to focus on the short term goals just as much as the more overarching, less tangible goals, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a big believer in you can't be relevant globally or even nationally if you aren't relevant locally. I think it has to start in your backyard, and that comes back to the ultimately to the experience. Your product is really, if you're a soccer club, your product is, this isn't quite true, but you'll understand the point that I'm making is it's the game that you attend or it's the game you watch on TV. Yes, there's a lot of other stuff around that core product, but your core product is 22 guys running around trying to kick a ball into the back of the net. And if you turn on a game and there's 3,000 people in the building and 20,000 empty seats, that is not dynamic, compelling, interesting television, right? What you're seeing when you turn that on, regardless of the sport, is, oh, no one cares about this. And so, I think it's one of the reasons that TV ratings have been a challenge for MLS over the years is it's changed, it's evolved. Their numbers are up really significantly this year as they head towards their Apple TV deal next year. But you've now got more markets where it's clear the teams are relevant, right? And the fan bases are into it and they're sold out and they're jumping and bumping. So, I think to kind of answer your question, it's almost kind of comical how many MLS teams over the years have said we want to be a global brand, we want to be an international brand. But I think the starting point has to be hyper local. It comes back to how do you plug into civic pride? How do you plug into the local culture? How do you plug into the local creative community? What's the hole in the wall taco joint down the street that everybody, if you're in the neighborhood, knows, right? How do you connect to them? Who are the up and coming musicians that are playing the pubs and the bars in the market? Who are your local muralists and your creatives? And how do you connect to culture in such a way that it communicates, we know this place and we are a part of this place? James Ruth, who's the head of marketing at Austin FC, has done a really good job of that, I think, over the last couple of years as they've come online. They recently did a collaboration with a local skate shop, completely outside of soccer, but it's kind of soccer's got a little bit of a counterculture, a little anti-establishment theme that runs through its fans and its supporters in particular, and that's kind of skate culture. And they've just done a really nice job, I think, of connecting to culture and community, same as LAFC, among other teams. And you could, there's a ton of examples in NWSL right now as you think about Angel City FC, San Diego Wave, KC Current. These teams are, community and city and culture first, and in a lot of cases, their values first. And so, I think that's the starting point for kind of sports marketing today. But yes, you have to be relevant locally before you can be globally.
Yeah. A few more minutes left here with Kyle Sheldon, founder and CEO, name and number. Kyle, I'm just going off now. I can all day. These great questions. I want to kind of get your take on this notion of, I mean, for lack of a better term, drama in sports. Like, you see the savage posts, you see all the manufactured I heard an NBA preview podcast a month ago or so that was like, the least exciting part for fans oftentimes is when the games actually get played. and you see that play out on social, certainly across sports, of I want to dunk on this team or make some savage posts about it. And you have your share of drama in the greater soccer world. I mean, every day there's another killing Mbappe rumor, of course, about whether or not he wants to stay at PSG. So when you look at, I guess it's certainly soccer culture overall, but certainly with MLS teams as well, how much should teams be leaning into that of hey, we want to be the snarky team on social, or we want to dunk on other teams and develop these, not even rivalries, but just having that sort of Nelson Muntz, look at you, ha ha. And so do you think that's overall a net positive? Should MLS clubs be chasing that kind of drama and soccer clubs in general, or is it really are they better off leaning into that more cultural connection where it's not just about making fun of your opponent?
Yeah, my thinking's evolved a lot on this, Neil, over the years. I mean, I think it's because of my kind of traditional PR background. I was more kind of buttoned up and in line early in my career, and have worked with people who've pushed the boundaries a little bit, and that's always a good push and pull. I think the starting point for the question is just who do you say you are? What is your brand? What sort of ethos are you putting out into the world? I think a little good old fashioned banter is a lot of fun. There's always a line that can be crossed, and I think teams have crossed the line. For many years, people pointed to the LA Kings and said, that's what we want to be. And I think that what gets missed sometimes is if you're kind of all snark all the time, or if that's kind of your thing, then it's difficult. It can be difficult to create a really kind of, again, community, cultural, values based brand, because you just become known as the team that dunks on people, kind of to use your language. I'll give one example in MLS, which I think the folks at Charlotte FC have done a really nice job with kind of finding the right line, where they've created, every time they've beaten a team, they typically have a graphic that is something specific to the team. And I think when they beat Red Bull, they had a crushed Red Bull can as an example. But it's simple. It's one post. It's a really clean design. It's a white background with a really simple element at the center that just kind of says, "Hey, we beat you," and it's just, it's fun. It's fun. So I think teams have to find their voice first, right? The exercise should not be, are we snarky? The exercise should be, who are we? What is our brand? What are our values? What sort of personality do we want to put out in the world across our channels? But the short answer is, I think there's always room for a little bit of fun and a little bit of poking of your opponent.
Oh yeah, something to latch onto, but it's not. It shouldn't be the whole thing, the whole picture. To your point, a little bit, and that's actually a great. I want to make sure we touch on this, and I promise we'll get to the shareable stat in just a moment here.
Sure.
But you were really part of a big push, or a big, I guess, reinvigoration or rebrand, whatever you want to call it, at Chicago Fire, and I thought it was just a masterclass in how to do something and make fans feel involved and a part of it, and you really you practice what you preach about, that connection with culture and community with the club. So take me through, I guess, the process of the Chicago Fire, whether you want to call it a rebrand or just changing the crest, and what went into that, and how you guys did seek to make sure the fans felt like they were a part of it.
Yeah, well, I think we were able to execute a really well constructed rebrand because we executed one that was not well constructed a year and a half prior.
Right.
And for those that follow, you can certainly, if you aren't familiar, you can Google, Chicago Fire rebrand will bring it up. I joined the club at a time when they were in the process of starting to think about a rebrand. And we don't spend a lot of time on the failures of the first rebrand, but the premise was really, I think, wrong in that the starting point was, hey, let's treat this like an expansion team. At that time, the team was playing out in the suburbs. They were moving back to Soldier Field in downtown. They'd had a number of years where they hadn't been successful. The fan base had eroded for a variety of reasons, including on-field performance. And so the idea was, let's recapture the imagination of Chicago with a new identity. That in and of itself isn't necessarily a bad starting point, but I think you had kind of this collision of strategies that were taking place. And, that first rebrand was done in a way where it was kind of a more traditional rebrand that you would have seen. It was largely done kind of behind closed doors,
Right.
Not in a malicious way. It's just how you how you used to do rebrands, is you sort of do it behind closed doors and you do a big reveal. There was fan engagement, but it was limited. The fans weren't driving the actual work fully and completely. There was discussion about changing the name. At that time, the club was going through an ownership change. So you just had kind of a natural disconnect as to what is this thing and what will it be in the future. At one point, the idea was to not only change the logo, but to change the name of the club as well. And ultimately, there was an owner who was really focused on wanting to keep the name at minimum. So you ended up with a totally new mark, but the same name. And so, and then ultimately, it just didn't connect with fans. What was kind of put in front of fans to say, this is your club, this is now what represents you. It ultimately was just a miss. There's no other way to put it. It was a failure. And we were fortunate, and I was fortunate in that we had an owner in Joe Mansueto who very quickly understood the need to kind of remedy the situation. And so again, I was fortunately in a position where I could go to him with a plan to redo the rebrand the rebrand, if you will. Right. And I said, we have to take the exact opposite approach. It won't work. And by the way, I think this is true for any rebrand. If you're an existing brand in any industry, you have people who care about you. You have stakeholders who connect with your visual identity, your voice, the whole picture. And so I said, with the help of obviously a great team, has said, we need this to be our guiding principle should be, this is the most open and transparent rebrand in pro sports history. Yeah. We want to be able to have anyone and everyone who wants to lend their voice to this project to do so. And so we provided updates the whole way through. It wasn't this idea of, hey, we're going to go do this thing, we're going to go behind closed doors, you'll hear from us in 12 to 18 months. It was, we're starting today, right? We hired Matt Wolf, who for my money is the best crest designer maybe in the world. He's done incredible work, including LAFC and NYCFC. He's an incredible designer. And so he came on board and I said, Matt, we're going to make your job really hard, man. You're going to have, thousands of creative directors. And so, we started with an open survey. We ran focus groups, we ran one-on-one interviews, and there was a dialogue the whole way through. And our job was to take everything we heard and ultimately synthesize it in such a way that it was an actionable for Matt to go and design a really beautiful crest. And it was a combination of pulling from your rich history. By the way, a club in the Fire who'd won multiple championships, had incredible iconic players. There was a lot of history there that was meaningful, and a name that's inspired by the origin story of the city in many ways, right? As you think about the Great Chicago Fire that happened 150 years ago. And so the exercise was really, how do we listen to our community? How do we create dialogue and conversation? How do we ultimately create attachment to the club such that at the end of this thing, we put something up on the screen that hopefully people can be really excited about? And I think we achieved that. I mean, I'm obviously biased, but I think Matt designed a beautiful mark. But it really is only possible because people participated, lent their voices, and we were able to ultimately, you're never going to please everyone, of course, right? Some people just wanted to go back to the old mark, but ultimately we were able to create something that felt like the club that they knew, and that's the most important thing.
Yeah, no, I really appreciate you walking us through that. I thought that the final outcome was incredible, and it was cool to see it play out, and to see you guys pivot and invite the fans to be part of the process. So when all said and done.
Yeah, thank you.
What area I want to pick your brain on, Kyle, before we sort of that is this notion of like MLS clubs sort of teaming up or having a sister club overseas or whatever you want to call that relationship. I don't really know exactly how you would frame it. And whether like where that's coming from, what's initiating that, what's to be gained from that. If you see this becoming a thing where every MLS club is going to have a sister club, whether in Liga MX or in the EPL or La Liga, and where it's coming from and who's kind of gaining the most, and I guess how are you seeing it play out, and is it overall a net positive for American soccer?
Yeah, it's a good question. You've seen it happen over the years, right? It's I mean, I'm back in the early 2000s, teams were doing sort of these partnerships, creating sister clubs. I think the challenge is that there tends to be a big announcement, and then you don't really see or hear much activity after that, right? It's sort of just, it's this idea that we're going to share business practices and we're going to potentially loan players, and then you sort of don't really hear about it again. I think that I'm a little bit of a broken record at this point, I think, Neil, but if the starting point is not which is the best club for us to partner with, just from a sheer kind of optics standpoint, but to come back to which is the club, if you're a European club, as an example, and you're looking at MLS and you're saying, we want to have a presence in the States in some way. And I'm certainly thinking a lot about this with the new agency name and number is, but the question isn't just, can we just pick one? It's which of those clubs represents our values in a similar fashion? Which one has a brand, or what is the connection? There has to be some natural connection. Otherwise, I don't think there's a lot of value in doing it. But because the U.S. soccer fan is still relatively young, as you think about kind of the generational fandom, is there's real opportunity, I think, for teams abroad to have presence in a particular market if they activate it the right way. That could be something as simple as a very cool merchandise collaboration. It could be playing a friendly against that team and then having presence in the actual market for a period of time. And there's a number of tactics, I think, that can bring that partnership to life. I just don't think many teams have done that to date. I think it's an announcement. It sounds really good. Maybe some of the executive levels talking to their colleague across the pond, a couple of times a year, but it doesn't really seem to be positively impacting fan experience in a way it's meaningful. The starting point for me is always whether you're a club or a brand or otherwise who is activating in the sport, is how are you adding value to the fan experience? What are you doing to enhance that experience? And this is something in a slightly different way Angel City has really done an incredible job of, is that every single one of their partnerships is somehow positively impacting the Los Angeles community, right? Every single partnership is doing something in LA for the good of the community. And I think it's like that ethos, right? So they're battling food security with DoorDash. They're battling access to transportation with Chevrolet. And if there's a club abroad who has that same ethos, man, wouldn't that be a cool partnership to bring those two clubs together and figure out how to speak to it on a grander scale and drive more impact? So I do think there's a way to do it. I don't know that many are doing it well at the moment, and there's going to be meaningfully more opportunity for it over the next 4 years as we point towards 2026 and the entire world's eyes on North America for what will be the biggest sporting event in the history of the world.
A great place for us to come. Although I could obviously go. We can go another hour just talking about what 2026 will mean and how best to activate that. But I don't want you to give away all your secrets anyway. I want you to work with several clubs across the board and help us maximize 2026. But so much good stuff, Kyle. We're gonna have some more fun with you coming up in our direct kick segment. The first episode of Shareable Stat coming up right now. Man, what a great chat with Kyle Sheldon, founder and CEO of Name and Number. Just such a sharp guy. Can pick his brain all day on everything. I really learned a lot. Able to distill some tough, complex questions and ideas into understandable statements, and just really good stuff from Kyle. And look forward to hearing more from him coming up on our direct kick segment. So stick around for that with some quick hitting questions, and more knowledge is shared from Kyle, and also some fun stories from his past. But first, this episode's Shareable Stat. This is what Shareable Stat comes from a recent study by eMarketer. You probably know them. They do a lot of stats in their Insider Intelligence website. And they looked at time spent by U.S. adults on various social media platforms in this year, 2022. And not surprisingly, the top one is indeed TikTok. Maybe it is surprising to you. And this is not based on like how many adults say regularly. There are separate metrics there, in which Instagram and the Meta platforms, look a little better. But as far as time spent, it is a two-horse race by a mile. They're way ahead, and that is basically a tie, a virtual tie, around 45-46% of time spent on social media by U.S. adults in 2022 is a tie between YouTube and TikTok. Yes, TikTok just teenagers, although I think we're way past thinking it's just for kids. That seems like a very old stereotype or archetype or whatever, or misnotion. But adults are on it, and they're spending a lot of time on it. But still, not to be forgotten, what I want to really go hone in on in that Shareable Stat is YouTube. Many times on this very show and some of these interviews, as well as conversations elsewhere, YouTube is often just mentioned. I hear the statement all the time. No one in sports is really, at least among sports teams or leagues, has really cracked YouTube. There are some teams and leagues doing some really good things, some awesome playlists and curation and regular shows, but no one really. It's hard to say who's really kicking ass on YouTube, and as far as really leveraging the platform for all it is. I think we've come to think of it as a search engine, and it is in many ways, as people have cited. Google and YouTube are the top two search engines in the world. TikTok is making its play for search as well, but it's more than just that. That sort of dumping ground for everything that someone could possibly discover when they're searching with intent. It's about getting that other part of the YouTube usage of people going there as a destination, subscribing to a user or a channel that they really like and they don't want to miss any videos. How can sports maybe work with individuals and empower creators that people can form relationships with and help leverage the sports teams, the league's IP, or various rights they can offer or license out. There's no really right or wrong answer here. It's something that I just wanted to point out in that U.S. adults, again, 46% of their time spent tied with TikTok. TikTok getting a lot of resources and efforts and thoughts right now, as rightfully so, as it continues to grow and drive more value. But YouTube, again, is always that good old faithful. It's always there. People are always spending time on it, and there's various ways to sort of attack it from a strategic perspective. And again, there's lots more opportunity there for sports organizations and brands in the space to take it to the next level and really accomplish what many other very reputable and successful YouTubers have as well as brands. All right, episode of Shareable Stat. Again, think about it, talk about it. Always a fun thought experiment to think through those kinds of time spent stats by U.S. adults. But more importantly, stick around for more with Kyle Sheldon of Name and Number. Back from this episode's Shareable Stat, I am joined once again by Kyle Sheldon. He is the founder and CEO of Name and Number. Kyle had so much fun picking your brain about all things soccer marketing, American soccer. Are you now ready to take some direct kicks?
I think I'm ready, Neil. Hit me.
All right, let's see if you can try to get as good as Messi with those. Those are all right. Number one, you talked about playing soccer in college and throughout your life as a kid. So tell me, give me the scatter report of Kyle Sheldon, the soccer player, when he was out.
Well, I've already hinted at it, I suppose. I would say I wasn't that good, but I really did love it. I played, I played center mid. I played a little outside mid. I was fast. I could get up and down the field. I wasn't the most dynamic player. I will tell you though, Neil, I'm in the record books at St. Olaf College, the D3 school I played at, because I led the team in assists my senior year with 3. which gives you a sense of we didn't score many goals. And by the way, 2 of those came in the last game of the year, which meant I had 1 assist over like 20 games, 2 in the final game. And you can look me up next time you go to Northfield, Minnesota.
Hey, that's a hell of a final game though, at least. I mean, what a way to go out. No, I love that. I think most of us grew up playing soccer, and hell, I still play oftentimes as an adult. It's awesome.
Love it.
Number two, I want to go back to your days at NASCAR. Tell me the most memorable initiative or campaign from your time there at NASCAR.
Yeah, we had a lot of fun at NASCAR. Again, it was I oversaw social media there, so we were able to test and explore a lot. One of my favorite campaigns was I was there in 2015 when NASCAR started what they call NASCAR Throwback, and obviously it's a sport that has history with a lot of older drivers and the cars that have changed and the paint schemes that have changed, and so when NASCAR launched that, they did it at Darlington Raceway, kind of an old racetrack. We said, let's just do it. Let's kind of do all of it throwback. We decided we bought a bunch of Polaroid cameras and we posted every photo as a Polaroid or as a picture of a Polaroid. Yeah. We found an app for our phones that made the footage look like 8mm photos. We wanted everything to have a feel of being kind of throwback. We had a typewriter that we would type out tweets on a typewriter and then take a photo of those. So it was really kind of a fun one. It picked up some media coverage. It doesn't sound that interesting today because I think people do things way more interesting, but at the time it was a really fun one.
That's great. I mean, NASCAR as an organization over the years that I've always enjoyed seeing the innovative stuff they do and pushing the envelope, and continues to still a strong sport these days, and definitely want to keep watching.
Indeed.
Although watching a full race, a full race is tough, but
they're long.
Great. Oh yeah. Number 3. This is going to be a tough one here. Tell me who has been or currently is, if they're currently active, who has been or is the most important American soccer player of our lifetime, and why?
It's a really challenging question to answer, and I'm going to probably hedge a little bit because I have a few names that pop into my head. I think it's hard. I'll list them off quickly. I mean, I think Landon Donovan, for all that he accomplished, and in particular at the U.S. men's national team level. I mean, his goal against Algeria in the 2010 World Cup remains one of my favorite sporting moments of all time. I always really loved watching Clint Dempsey play as he was coming up, and I think he's kind of I think he's a really interesting case for an example of what an American player can be. And you've seen it with the modern day players, but played in MLS, the New England Revolution, went over to Fulham, went to a big club in Tottenham, came back to the Sounders, scored in 3 straight World Cups. I mean, Dempsey, he's got an attitude and swagger that people love. So it's hard not to say him. And then I'll throw one more name out, which is not what you asked, I realize, Neil, but Claudio Reyna, who's maybe a little less known, but he's the GM now at Austin FC. And he was one of the first players that really established themselves in Europe. He played for Rangers in Scotland, Sunderland, Man City, and then eventually came back to the New York Red Bulls, also played in 3 World Cups. Those players all, I think, had impact at the MLS level, they had impact globally, and they had impact at the World Cup. So I unfortunately can't pick just one, but those 3, I think, are probably 3 of the most impactful in our lifetime.
Those are great. And it's cool to see like players that make a dent with their MLS club, but then also make a dent with the national team, and also like we can have a certain sense of national pride when we see someone go to one of those top tier, EPL La Liga clubs and say that's one of ours over there.
Yeah, when we're spoiled for choice at the moment with the number of players that are playing for big clubs in Europe. It's a really fun time, and obviously our national team at the moment is, I think, the youngest to have qualified for the World Cup this year. So they're probably better primed for 2026, but it's going to be really fun to watch their development, both at home here in MLS and abroad over the years.
Hell yeah. We're on the upswing. That's a good thing. Number 4, this is going to be a really tough one. And I will tell you to try to exclude teams that are that you've worked with or are working with. And
fair enough.
A lot more. So tell me, the best home atmosphere in Major League Soccer is where?
It's actually a hard one to answer today because I think you've seen the growth of interest and relevance across MLS. There's so many, we talked about it earlier a little bit. There's so many teams now that have great fan experiences, great supporter sections. I mentioned them earlier. I mean, I think LAFC and Austin FC have 2 of the best. I've seen both of them in person, so I can speak to it. I've not been to every market, right? I haven't yet been to Cincinnati and seen what they're doing. I've not been to Charlotte, so I reserve the right to change my mind. But what those supporters groups do in being sort of full throated and just raucous and jumping for the full game, and LAFC is probably takes the edge just by a bit because those guys get in an hour before the game starts and they're going for 2.5 hours. And it's really special what they've built there. LAFC quickly followed behind by Austin in my experience.
Love it. Those some great ones there, and it really is cool that and unique to the sport of soccer how much the fans affect the experience for everyone else. And like when you have that full throw supporters group and they're cheering and chanting somehow the entire 90 minutes plus, I don't know how they do it. It really you come home being like that was a hell of a lot of fun, and the score may not even matter.
I think the answer is they go hoarse for a couple of days, Neil.
Seriously,
You just accept it.
There needs to be like some sort of sponsorship with like a tea company or something that you get.
Good idea. That one's for free, folks. That one's for free.
Number 5 for you. This is gonna be a fun one. You've come across a lot of players over your career, I'm sure, in your various roles. So tell me the most memorable or charismatic player that you've worked with in your career so far.
The player that immediately jumps to mind, and if he eventually listens to this, it won't surprise him, is Bobby Boswell, who was a defender for DC United when I was there. He actually came into the league the same year I did. We both started there at 2005. And Bobby is an absolute nut. And we sort of found in each other people who were willing to, again, kind of test and try things. After his first year, he was kind of I think, undrafted rookie out of Florida International. He ended up starting 30 games or so his rookie year, kind of out of nowhere. He ended up winning Defender of the Year the next year, but we started BobbyBoswell.com. It was the first player blog in MLS. We did video segments. We put him up for Cosmopolitan Bachelor of the Year one year. He actually won, but couldn't participate because of the schedule at DC United.
Wow.
Guy was always ridiculous. He was making, $32,000 a year as a rookie. He threw a party. We were there. David Beckham's first ever game was in DC in 2006. And Bobby decides he's going to throw a party. And the guy's making no money. And it became, the thing that was written up in like all the papers as the must go to Beckham party. And the poor kid, I think, maxed out his credit card paying for drinks. But he's just who he was. Great personality, always up for a lot of fun. And I saw him at MLS All-Star this past year in Minnesota, and it was good to reconnect. He's a good one.
That's awesome. Do you feel like there is that growth of players that have the personality on their own social platforms nowadays, of course, where they are helping grow in the sport because they're becoming social media stars? Or is that still sort of an untapped resource to have those guys that really break through and get that social media clout?
I actually think that players have really pulled back from social on the whole. I think you're finding less and less. I mean, what we were doing in DC at that time was really raw. I mean, we were just putting stuff out in the world without a lot of concern for what was going to come back. And I think players are just generally, they're a lot more carefully managed. They're more concerned about their kind of the reputation and how they're viewed. And so there's clearly opportunity to do it really well. I think, unfortunately, a lot of what's put out in the world is it feels very branded content. It feels like there's a sponsor attached to it. And it's not that can't be successful. Again, it's just, that comes back to what is the approach and what are you creating and what are you trying to accomplish? But I think you're seeing fewer and fewer players who are really active in a raw way. Maybe not, you don't want to quite go Kevin Durant level, but there's probably a happy medium in there somewhere.
No, totally. I would tend to agree. That's why I brought to bring it up. This is going to be a one I'm interested to hear. So tell me, we probably talked about it in our interview. As a marketer overall, whether it's sports or just over in general, what's your sort of your number one like mantra or guiding principle for you as a marketer?
Yeah, I think I've probably said it over the course of the interview. I mean, I'll try to be succinct, which is, I think the starting point is you want to add value for your fan or your follower. You want to improve or enhance every experience. You want to entertain, and connected to that is everything we talked about related to creating a sense of community and a sense of belonging. Sports really is about connecting people at the end of the day and giving people something to care about. So I think if you're focused on kind of how you can add value to someone's experience, and that's sporting experience, life experience, again, kind of connectedness to other people, I think there are a lot of ways to do that. There's a lot of tactics to do that, but if you kind of can come back to that as a bit of a guiding principle, then you're probably in a pretty good spot.
Yeah, no, I always love that, and especially when it comes time to like these big games or these postseason events, I find myself texting with someone about the San Diego Padres or San Diego Wave or whatever it might be, and those are people that I may rarely talk to, and yet it's a connecting tissue there that drives those relationships, and that's one of the magical things about sports that I love.
There really isn't something that kind of brings people together than a team that's having some amount of success or has a really compelling moment, right? To your point, like text threads just get fired up kind of across the board, family members, old friends. it's a really special point of connection for people. And that's what it's the beauty. You're fortunate to work in sports, right? Is that feeling that can exist in the sport is really pretty special at its best. It's not always at its best, but when it is, it's really fun.
Yeah. All right, this is gonna be a tough one for you, Kyle. Tell me the coolest soccer stadium that you've ever been to a game at, and what's the one on your bucket list that like I gotta get to see a game of this at this stadium at some point.
The first ever game I saw abroad is the answer to my question, Neil, and it was Craven Cottage in London, which is Fulham FC's home ground.
Wow.
It's this incredible little stadium. It's kind of tucked into the neighborhood. And at the time I was there, I was in high school. Eddie Lewis, who's a former U.S. men's national team player, also played in MLS, was there. And they obviously have had a history of American players, including Clint Dempsey, Brian McBride, Eddie Johnson, Casey Keller, Carlos Bocanegra. I mean, the list goes on. But that experience of being at Craven Cottage and kind of what felt like a really true sort of long-standing traditional club in Fulham was really special. And I was there with my family, so it was particularly a really fun day. Second part of your question, I think seeing the yellow wall at Borussia Dortmund
Yeah.
is on the bucket list. And then, not that I'm a big Borussia Dortmund fan or necessarily a big Liverpool fan, but going to Anfield at some point, I'd love to just experience the Kop and see that in person. So Yellow Wall at Borussia Dortmund, and then Anfield and Liverpool.
Oh, some good ones there. Take me with you to either of those.
You got it.
Number 8. This is time for our food question. We always got to ask a food question. So tell me, if I come out there and visit you in the greater Chicago area, what's the best meal to get in Chicago, and where do we get it?
Man, I think that you'd expect folks maybe to give a deep dish pizza answer. I'm going to go in a different direction. And I'm going there tomorrow, which is why it's top of mind. There's a place called Johnny's Beef, and it is a no frills hot dog sausage beef sandwich stand in the western suburbs. And they've got this incredible Italian ice. And if you've watched the show The Bear on it's on FX, it's a great show that was shot in Chicago about a beef sandwich shop. It's a really great. You can get a great meal for $8 to $10, and the food's really good, and it just kind of has that like really nice kind of hometown Chicago feel to it. So that's Johnny's Beef.
Ooh, I like it. Sounds good. Now that you've been in Chicago for throughout your life, a little while now, are you officially like a hot dog snob? Like if someone asks for ketchup, you can them?
No, I can't. I mean, I've been here about 3.5 years, so not yet a hot dog snob. And I got 2 little kids who love ketchup, so I'm not allowed to say no ketchup.
All right, there we go. A ketchup safe zone. I'm glad because I'm a ketchup guy. Number 9 for you coming down to the end here with Kyle Sheldon of Name and Number. Tell me the sports team outside of MLS and any current clients whose marketing you most admire and why.
Yeah, two come to mind. One is the Carolina Panthers. I think they've really done a really interesting job with their brand over the last few years. I find them as a team that's not afraid to try things. They're embracing kind of trends and some of the memification, but they're doing it in a way that does fit their brand and their voice. And I think they have a very distinct voice. They push the boundaries on content in a way I think is really compelling. And so I've been following them for a while and been very impressed with what they've done over the last few years. And then I'll mention a team in my backyard who I think is one of the best marketed teams in sports, which is the Chicago Bulls. Obviously an iconic brand, and very well known globally, but they do an incredible job. And thinking about all the things we've talked about today, Neil, I mean, plugging into culture and into art, fashion design. They're doing really cool custom merch drops on their mobile app. Their VP of marketing is a guy named Dan Moriarty, who's an Englishman, who's a soccer fan as well, and a really, really smart, forward-thinking guy. And so I've been really impressed with what they've done over the years. And if you don't know their stuff, sort of some of their activities, I'd encourage folks to check out their social handles because they're doing a great job.
Totally. I mean, what they've done with artists and kit and like merchandise and NFTs with artists recently, like
they're all over it, man. Yeah, they got their hands on a little bit of everything, which is cool. It's not easy to do. They're prolific, and they seem to maintain a really high standard.
Yeah, just good stuff. All right, last one for you here, Kyle. I'm gonna put you on the spot, on the record. Tell me, winner of the 2022 FIFA Men's World Cup, the men's side will be who?
I think it's very difficult to predict, and it is hard to pick against someone like Brazil or Argentina. But I'm going to go with my heart and say Argentina. I think it'd be amazing to see Messi win it near the end of his career. He's been such a dynamic player. Obviously, for my money, I think he's the best player of all time. And so the idea of him bringing a World Cup title back to Argentina would be pretty cool. So I'm going to say Argentina.
I would love to see it. It'd be a hell of an ending to that Netflix documentary we'll get one day. So great.
Exactly right.
Either way, we're looking forward to some great football, great soccer. It's gonna be so much fun. All right, Kyle, you nailed your direct kicks. Now your chance to take over the podcast and tell us your social media all-star to follow. Just tell us who they are, what platform they're on, and why they're worth following.
Yeah, I've given you multiple answers on each question, Neil. So hopefully you'll allow me to mention two people. One is a young one I've gotten connected to this year named Caitlin Stevens, who spent some time in her career at Atlanta United. She's like me, someone who just loves and consumes the sport of soccer. She and her husband travel the world now. She's freelancing and consulting, not exclusively in soccer, but in a lot of soccer. And she's just doing some really interesting things on TikTok. She's got a travel space that she does as herself, as Caitlin Stevens, but then she has a number of clients that she's activating across social. She's got a really good feel, I think, for what works on TikTok in particular, and someone that I'm hoping I can work with at the new agency with Name and Number. She's a good one. So that's Caitlin Stevens, and then I'll mention Jack Appleby of Morning Brew.
Yeah.
He's someone that, a lot of people that maybe are kind of in this space might already know, but he's been at Morning Brew now for some number of months. He's worked with some massive big brands over his career. And I like Jack because he's just very generous in sharing his thoughts and sort of how he views the world, his reactions to what he's seeing. He does a lot of real-time coverage of what's happening in the marketing space. Again, not specific to sports necessarily, but he's an NBA guy, so he does a lot in the NBA. He does great case studies. He's got a newsletter now with Morning Brew called Future Social, which is a kind of a must read for my money. And just he's one of those follows that you just know he's going to add value and teach you something just about every week. So that's Jack Appleby of Morning Brew.
Very nice. Couple good ones there. And yeah, Jack's definitely someone I've come across a lot. A conversation starter for sure. And always gives some good dialogue to be had there. And how about you, Kyle? Where can we find you as well as all things name number across web and digital social?
Yeah, I think by the time this airs, we'll be live with the agency. So the URL is nameandnumber.com. Very straightforward. And then myself, I'm at Kyle Sheldon on both Twitter and LinkedIn. You can find me there. I love connecting to people who love the sport. So I always say, please don't hesitate to drop me a line and connect. And if I can help connect somebody across the industry, I'm always happy to do it.
Hell yeah, definitely connect with Kyle, and so excited to see Name and Number officially launched by the time this podcast airs. And
I guess I have to do it now, Neil. I have to do it now. We've done the pod. There's no turning back.
No turning back, exactly. But thanks so much again, Kyle, and best of luck with Name and Number and everything going forward.
Neil, thanks so much for having me, man. I really enjoyed the conversation and wish you the best as you go forward, my friend.
Thank you to Kyle Sheldon, founder and CEO of Name and Number. So excited for him to start this agency. Again, it does just such great work. Very, really knows his stuff. Has been through a lot through his various stops and throughout soccer as well as at NASCAR. And he's really going to help this market continue to grow in its love for soccer across the board and the growth of Major League Soccer in the U.S. And of course the World Cup that we're all excited about both this year as well as in 2026 when North America will be the hosts. But again, cannot thank Kyle enough for sharing his time, his knowledge, and just his great expertise and thoughts with us today. But that'll do it for this episode of the Digital and Social Media Sports Podcast. Thanks again for listening. As always, I am your host, Neil Horowitz. You can find me on LinkedIn where I post more content. My Twitter handle is at NJH287. Find me there while Twitter is still live and kicking. And of course, the website dsmsports.net for more episodes and content. And follow along on the podcast on your preferred podcast platform. You can find the podcast and subscribe and find every episode going back over 9 years. All right, until next time, this is Neil Horowitz signing off for the Digital and Social Media Sports Podcast.